All right, let me try that again. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here and spending your evening with the library. And welcome to our Elo Reads presentation, Live Man Walking, What We Do with the Guilty. My name is Joshua Macias. I'm an adult services librarian here at the library. And I am filling in for Nancy. Nancy is unfortunately feeling under the weather and sends her apologies. But before we get started, I did want to take a moment to thank our Friends of the Library. So if you aren't familiar, our Friends of the Library are a nonprofit group of volunteers, and they fundraise year-round for the library. They put on fundraisers, they run 2 bookstores, and with all the profits that they make, they help us run our program. So they help us with live music, they help us bring in artists and authors, and they are a huge sponsor for Elo Reads. So we wouldn't be here without them, so if you could help me in thanking our Friends of the Library. Another thing I did want to mention is that the library has assistive listening devices in the back by the entrance. There's some headphones there. You just plug them in, and then the feed from the microphone will go straight to it, and that can help. So if you'd like, you can just grab one, and they work best if you're also near the presenter as well. In that same area as well, we also have printed and digital program surveys, so that's really helpful for us. Just fill it out. It's only 3 questions. Let us know how we're doing and how we can improve, and we'd appreciate that if you did that on your way out. All right, so tonight we have the privilege of hearing from Rene Denfeld about the realities of the U.S. carceral system. Rene is a licensed investigator who has worked hundreds of cases, including death row exonerations and helping sex trafficking victims. As the past chief investigator at a public defense firm, she won the Break the Silence Award in 2017 and was named a Hero of the Year by the New York Times. Her novels, influenced by her justice work, have won numerous prestigious awards, including the French Prix, which I'm told is like a Pulitzer, but even cooler, a Carnegie listing, an Impact listing, and more. Margaret Atwood has termed her writing astonishing. She is a happy mother of kids from foster care and lives in Portland. Her novels include The Enchanted, The Child Finder, The Butterfly Girl, and Sleeping Giants. So we are very pleased to have Rene with us here this evening. So please help me in welcoming her. You bet. There you go.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. I will get settled here. I tend to be soft-spoken, so if you're not catching me, just speak up and say louder. Okay, so this is just a delight for me, and we're going to be covering a lot in an hour. I want to make sure that we have time for like some conversation and Q&A as well. But I know that this is a huge topic in my experience, and there's no way we can go over everything in an hour, and I'm sure that I'm going to miss things. And it's kind of human nature for us to go, wait, what about this? What about that? So if I do miss anything, I hope you will give me grace and perhaps bring it up in the Q&A if there's things that I'm not covering that you think are important as well. So, yeah, as mentioned, I've been doing justice work it's been off and on almost 20 years. I first got licensed back in 2007. One of the best choices I ever made was doing this work, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. The second other great choice I made was my kids, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So let's get started. All right, I'm just a little here about me. So as mentioned by our wonderful host, and this is a beautiful library, by the way. It's absolutely gorgeous. Licensed investigator. I've worked hundreds of cases. I was briefly a chief investigator at the Metropolitan Public Defenders in downtown Portland. Longtime foster and adoptive mom, and I have written some books. In case you're like to know a little bit more about me personally, this is a modern love essay I wrote for the New York Times that went viral. And it's just a little personal story about my journey with my kids. So you guys can look that up if you like. Now, let's get into the subject of incarceration. Does anybody recognize this movie still? Come on, I thought we're all in the same generation. I should have probably picked another one, another picture from the movie. This is Escape from New York. Does anybody remember that kind of B-level movie? Yeah. A long time ago. Was it in the 80s? Yeah. So, my notes here. So, this was a very popular movie. Basically, the theme of it was that all the criminals in the United States were sent to New York. It was kind of like Prison Island. And it's kind of a common theme, I think, in our culture. It's and that's why we're going to be talking about the urge to exile. Let me find a place for my notes here. Hold on a second. And I remember when I was, oopsie, it's going backwards. When I was a little girl, my brother Dennis, who was a wonderful man who I dearly miss. But whenever the subject of crime came up, Dennis had the very easy and convenient answer. He said, let's just send them all to an island, which is basically the theme of this movie, and I think of a lot of other kind of popular themes in our culture, that when the subject of, like, what do we do with people that commit crimes? What do we do with people that commit harm comes up, it's a very normal, natural, instinctual kind of thing to say, let's get rid of them. Let's send them away. And I personally believe, in my experience, that this urge to exile people is just kind of how we're wired in a way. It's something we do to, in part, to feel safer. Somebody's committed a crime. Somebody's broken into our car. Maybe they've stolen something. Maybe they've broken into our home. Maybe they've done things that are worse. And our primal kind of response is to say, let's send them away. Let's put them outside of our society and send them someplace else. And I think we do it in part for feelings of safety, but also because the urge to exile kind of goes to a real core human emotion that we have, which is we all know that one of the worst things that can happen to us as a human being is to be shunned. And I think that's also a very deep kind of primal thing inside of us. To be shunned is one of the worst consequences that can happen to us. And we've all experienced it at some point in our lives. I think we've all had the experience of being shunned by a group of friends, shunned by a community, shunned maybe by a church, or shunned by a family. And when we feel shunned, I mean, it hurts us in our core. And I think part of our urge to exile people, to send them away, comes from a place of knowing that that is the worst possible punishment. And so we have this urge to exile people. And that's essentially what we have done when we're talking about mass incarceration in the United States. And what I want to do is talk specifically about mass incarceration in Oregon. Now, a lot of things that we're going to talk about here are common in every single state. And in many ways, actually, Oregon is one of the better states in terms of statistics, from my point of view. And we have a much more humane system than many states. But by focusing in on Oregon, I want to just take it a little more localized than talking about it nationally. We can talk nationally as well. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about mass incarceration here in Oregon is true for other states across the country. At this point, 1.4 million Oregonians have a criminal record. So when I'm talking about incarceration, I'm not just talking about people that are serving a life sentence. I'm talking about anybody that has served time in a jail or prison, anybody who has been impacted with having a criminal record and having been incarcerated in some way. What this means for us in our state is it's more than 1 in 6. Someplace between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 Oregonians currently has a criminal record. And this, to me, is an astonishing number. And we're going to talk about the ramifications of what that means. So the vast majority of people with a criminal record in Oregon, as with other places, are actually nonviolent offenses. It can range from trespassing, you know, property offenses, driving offenses. There's any number of kind of things that you can have a criminal record for. Having a criminal record today in our culture has hugely adverse impacts upon a person's life that wasn't always true. When I was growing up, you could have a criminal record and people generally wouldn't find out, right? But now we have a thing called the internet. And having a criminal record in this culture means somebody's going to find out, and it has lifelong impact. So, let's talk about what that means. So prisons and jails in Oregon. Here's just a little map I pulled off of our friend the internet. It shows you kind of the locations of prisons, and these are just the prisons. This doesn't include all the jails. And there's little things, but you know, I spend a lot of time going to prisons to interview people. I pretty much have been, I think I've been in all these prisons. Been in a lot of jails as well, and I've been in a lot of prisons and places in other states as well. And what's interesting to me about prisons and jails is these are all paid for by our taxes. Your taxes and my taxes pay for these institutions. But at the same time, there is, if you, for instance, right now called up Coffee Creek or this is Snake River Prison right here. It's to get to Snake River, and you have to take a puddle jumper plane into Boise, Idaho, and then get a rental car and drive there because it's right on the border. It's way out there, and that's one thing we do with prisons in our nation is we tend to put prisons way out in the middle of nowhere, right? They're kind of hidden in plain sight. But if you were to say, call up Snake River right now and say, I'd like to come tour your facility, I'm a concerned taxpayer. You know what they're going to tell you? No. It's very hard for even reporters to get access to prisons. So what we have are these tax-funded institutions which are basically operating without really any civilian kind of oversight. Yes, there are committees and different people that are theoretically have oversight over these places, but they're operating really outside the public view. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Hold on a second, make sure that we are not skipping too far ahead. Here we go. So let's talk really quick about what happens when you do have a criminal record. And this can be anything from you're 19, you make a really stupid mistake one day, you steal a car. I see this a lot in public defense work. Most people that are making stupid mistakes are young, right? And this is where it gets really, really gritty. Obviously, we're going to talk about this too. We want to have accountability when people make mistakes. You know, I'm not advocating at all that there not be accountability, that we not do something about people that make mistakes. But what happens when you get a criminal record? Well, you're going to have a really hard time getting a job. Even if you have a minor offense or arrest on your record, it's going to really impact your life. It's going to be really hard to get work. It's going to be hard if you have a criminal record to find housing. So what we've done in our state, we now have between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 Oregonians who have criminal records. And what we've done, in my opinion, is we have created an increasingly disenfranchised population that continues to cycle downwards. We keep arresting people, they get criminal records, they go to prison, they go to jail, and they get out. And then what happens? They really struggle in life. They cannot advance forward. The truth of incarceration is the vast majority of people that go to prison get out. And I think when people start talking about wanting prison island, we have this idea in our head, we're just going to send people away, it solves the problem. It's very natural to think, somebody committed a crime, I want them to be punished, I want them to go to prison, that solves the problem. But we're not thinking ahead to the issue of what happens when they get out, because most people are going to get out. We can't send everybody that makes a mistake to prison. And I don't think most of us here, or most people in general, would want that. You give an example of, like, say, a 19-year-old who makes a really stupid mistake and steals a car. We don't want that person to go away to prison forever. And I think that's true with a lot of the crimes that people commit. We don't, there's actually very few, statistically speaking, people in prison that commit the kind of horrifying crimes that we think of when we're talking about who goes to prison. And I think that that's happened because we have this kind of mythology in our culture, and I know this as a writer and somebody who reads voraciously and construct stories myself. When people are thinking about criminals, they're thinking about the Hannibal Lecter type, right? We're thinking about the brilliant sociopath who puts on women's skins and he capers around and he's cunning, he's horrifying, he's brilliant, he's without remorse, he's all these terrible things, he's a monster. That's what we think about when we think about like who's in prison, who needs to go to prison. But I'm here to tell you, as somebody who's actually worked death row level crimes, that's not what it usually is. Even among people who are doing very serious time for very serious offenses, and I'm not saying they should not be doing serious time, it's more often that this is, I'm thinking of, cases, for instance, two drug dealers get in a dispute. One accuses the other one of ripping them off. Bad things ensue. People get into, two guys get into a really bad bar fight. A knife gets pulled. A death happens. That's a very serious thing to have happen, but it's also not the kind of Hannibal Lecter kind of crime that people, I think, are imagining. The whole Hannibal Lecter thing is interesting because I think that's kind of what people are expecting when they're talking about crime. And actually, I have to tell you, I've worked hundreds of cases, and I have yet to meet a brilliant sociopath. It's actually an ongoing joke with some other people that do this work. It's like as soon as we meet one, we're going to call everybody else. Say, I found him. He's here. Because most of them are not terribly brilliant, I'll tell you that much. So most of the people, though, that are going to prison, it's going to be for something like an assault. They got, again, into a fight outside the bar, or something happened, and a crime was committed. They're going to go to prison, and they're going to be out maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years. What's going to happen to that person? And that's something that I'm just asking people gently to consider. What happens to these people that we're incarcerating? We're already starting to see, very visibly, this is what happens. And statistically, you can go get Google happy and look all this up. But what we're finding, and I'm not surprised, I'm in Portland, and I grew up in the North Portland area and raised my kids in North Portland, lots of homeless camps. And it's what happens when you disenfranchise millions of people. And I see this over and over again in my work. Somebody gets arrested for one offense or another. Maybe they do a couple weeks in county jail. Maybe they go away to prison for a few years. They get out. They cannot get the job. They cannot find housing. Their entire life has been completely disrupted. And any gains and progress maybe they may have made before have been completely wiped out. And they end up homeless. And I haven't seen really studies breaking down. I think there's a lot of causes of homelessness in our current society. There's extremely high housing prices. There's addiction and other issues, though I do want to point out that I think a lot of times if you're not addicted before you became homeless, you will probably end up addicted from being homeless because you've already experienced a great deal of trauma inside prisons. And so the outcomes of being homeless also are you have increased rates of mental health issues and all these other things. So I believe that one thing that we have done with mass incarceration in Oregon, if you're thinking between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 Oregonians have a criminal record, is it any surprise that we have, I think there was just a count that was released by Multnomah County that found, I think there was something about 14,000 homeless people on the streets of Multnomah County. 14,000. And kind of those statistics, not surprisingly, line up with the number of people that we have that have a criminal record here. So we have increasingly number of homeless in Portland, and then what happens, what I think people see all the homeless, and it's something that I see in my neighborhood. And you know, it's natural. You have these big camps. The camps tend to have a lot of crime, it appears. I go by camps regularly in my neighborhood where there's needles laying around. You know, it's not a good, healthy environment, I'll say that much. So instinctually, where do we go? What's our answer? What do we start thinking should happen? And I see people suggest this all the time. Lock them up. We have all these homeless people. Perhaps it's been caused by mass incarceration, at least in part, and then people automatically go to like, how do we solve the homeless issue? People start saying, well, why don't we just arrest them? And that's what happens. So this is just a statistic from some time ago, but I think it's probably very current today in my experience, maybe even worse. So what ends up happening is, though the homeless are a relatively small percentage of people in Portland, they then account for the majority of the arrests. So we've created this cycle then. You go to prison or jail, you get out, you can't get a job, you can't get housing, you end up homeless. What happens when you're homeless? You're more likely to get arrested. You get another charge for something relating to being homeless, you go back to jail. Maybe you spend 2 or 3 days there, you get out, you now whatever gains you've made. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a houseless lady who ended up being homeless because she actually was escaping from a domestic violence situation. This is very common. And so women that are being battered and abused often will leave with nothing but the shirt on their back. And because of housing prices and everything, she was really struggling. She ended up being homeless. She was working hard to get in a better situation. She got a job at like UPS working. If you do the stocking at UPS or Amazon, it's at night. And so she was trying really hard to get off the streets and making gains, and then she got arrested on some relatively minor offense, some petty thing. I don't even remember what it was. So what happened? She lost her job. And she ended up cycling lower and lower and lower. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing at this point. I feel like I am not being very cheerful. So I'm going to touch upon a couple other quick things here before we kind of get to kind of more of an answer thing instead of just it's one thing to name the problem, right? But you have to think about what we're going to do. So anyhow, I wanted to to really touch on this very quickly is there's reasons too that we have mass incarceration. And it's not just that we have this urge to exile. It's not entirely cultural. There's also the issue of profit. Mass incarceration is profitable for people. There are financial incentives to creating the mass incarceration system, and I think now there are financial incentives to keeping it operating. So basically, as taxpayers, we pay for these prisons. Every time you pay your taxes, it goes to keeping the prison open. It goes to all the bills that the prison incurs, and it goes to paying the correctional staff. It goes to all these things. And then the prisons themselves also make money for businesses. And, you know, it's interesting because here in Oregon, we're better than a lot of states in that we don't allow private prison companies. Our prisons here are actually state prisons, which is better. But at the same time, state prisons act as these kind of shell industries for profiteers. And I can give you some examples of that. When an inmate has made a phone call in the past, they might get charged something, like $5 a minute or something for that phone call. So there's a company making money off the inmate phone calls. There's another company that's making money inmate health care. So even though we have these state-funded and run prisons, there are a lot of people that are making money off the inmates, and some of the biggest people that are profiting are businesses that use inmate forced labor. So there's a financial incentive for businesses to have inmates that are working for literally pennies a day. And as inmates, they are required by law to work. So here in Oregon, you have situations where there are inmates who are required by law to work who might be sewing clothes. I mean, I think McDonald's relies on inmate labor for their uniforms. In a lot of states, massive farms, fish farms, tilapia. Inmates call it the slave fish because inmates raise the tilapia in these giant fish farms. They're paid pennies a day for this. So now we have businesses that are kind of invested in the system we've created. And because this is also in the news, I wanted to touch upon this. Detention facilities and deportations also make money for someone. Someone is profiting off of that detention center. Somebody has a contract to deport somebody else. So there's a lot of people out there that are making money off mass incarceration while you and I are funding it. And we're funding the system that allows them to make money. Make sure that I'm not skipping ahead here. And I'm going to take another drink. Sorry, I've had a long day. I've been working. So, and we'll have let me see what time it is here. Oh, awesome. We're going to have a few minutes for a Q&A as well. So, if we don't have Prison Island as I think of it, if we're not going to be looking at exiling people, then I think we have the question of what do we do? We can't send everybody away to prison for the rest of their lives. That's not a viable answer. So we really collectively think as a society have to ask ourselves and ask each other and come together to say, what do we want to do with people that commit harm? And I've worked cases with the innocent, and I'm not talking about the innocent here. I think most people, at least, will agree the innocent should not be convicted or serve time. I'm sure there's people who might even argue that point. But I'm talking about the guilty. If somebody breaks into your house and steals something, what should we do with them? Where I'm at, in my neighborhood, you don't leave anything on your porch. What do we do with the porch pirates? What do we do with somebody that hits his wife? What do we do with somebody that commits a worse offense? And these are the kind of questions I wrestle with all the time because I see what happens in prisons. And it's interesting to me for all that we incarcerate people, and I say this as a survivor myself, we still are not helping the victims. We do so little for victims and trauma survivors in this society. And sending somebody away to prison, and I've seen it over and over again, it doesn't seem to be necessarily the most helpful outcome, especially if we're releasing them 3 years later and they're either traumatized or hardened or more violent than before. So, what do we do? I'm going to go over a couple things here real quick. One is I think what I would like is just for more of us to stop and pause. There's always crimes in the news. There's always crimes that affect us and things that come up. And I think if we need to stop and pause and ask ourselves, okay, it's a natural human urge. My instinct is to say, banish this person, send them away, get rid of them. They should go to prison. That's a normal way to react. But I think the more that we can just kind of pull ourselves back and pause and say, hold on, let's think about outcomes here. What do we want the outcome to be? Do we want to tend to the victim? Do we want to prevent more crimes like this happening? Do we want to stop this person from offending again? What is the outcome that we want to see happen when somebody has done something they should not do? And so I think that is the first kind of thing of just stopping ourselves and saying, hold on, okay. Because I get it. I mean, we all have that kind of natural urge of saying, let's get rid of this person. But instead of that, asking ourselves, okay, what kind of outcome do we want? I think the second thing that we need to do is we need to be realistic. And by that, I mean it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to have standards. I think one of the problems people, when we start talking about like fighting mass incarceration, the first initial concern everybody has is they start asking, well, okay, what does that mean? We're just going to release everybody from prison? They're all just going to be running around? We're not going to do anything about crime? And that's not the case at all. I think my experience is we need to have places where some people have to go for a while to keep them safe and to keep other people safe. I personally think that we need to acknowledge that that's the case. There are times that people need to be kept safe for themselves and for other people. What does that look like? Can it be humane? Can it be a situation that might actually have interventions to help that person to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Can we be realistic about how we want things to look in our own communities? I find it very interesting that in our society, we willingly kind of open up our pocketbooks and let them take a bunch of our taxes to build prisons. And for some reason, we don't, I think a lot of us don't kind of quite think of that. But when somebody says, hey, will you pay more taxes for an addiction treatment center? Suddenly we're like, oh, I don't know. You know, so in some ways, I think we've just kind of stopped realizing that we're actually paying a lot more to incarcerate people and effectively destroy their lives than we would be paying for interventions where we would be preventing this from happening. We could take a fraction of the money that we spend supporting prisons and put that into alcohol and drug treatment centers. Put it into meaningful interventions for things like domestic violence. And because I have to tell you, I've had a lot of experience with these kind of cases. And right now the way it is you can have a man who is battering his partner, and he might serve a couple months and get sent to an anger management class. It's like once a week. And that's it. So the more that we can think about, like, how do we really want to meaningfully intervene? How can we be realistic about the outcomes we want to have? How can we also support the survivors and the victims while we're doing it? And again, I think we could do all of that at a fraction of the cost that we're actually paying for the mass incarceration. And that goes to, foundational solutions and creative solutions. Foundational solutions I think of are, for instance, a lot of crime and bad things happen because of poverty. And it may not always look like poverty on its face. It's not always like somebody's stealing food for their dinner, though that happens. A lot of theft. There's a reasons why they lock up the diapers and stuff in a lot of stores, because there's things that cost a lot of money that people can't afford. Formula, diapers, things like that. So there's a lot of those kind of poverty-related offenses, but there's also just a lot of offenses that happen because people are in such a place of pessimism about their future, a pessimism about what's going on in their own lives. And I know there's been a lot of actually research into this, and you can look up studies, but one of the biggest ways to prevent crime is actually through economic optimism. When people feel they have a hopeful future, when they feel they can maybe buy a house someday or even just pay their rent, they're much less likely to commit an offense. And so those are the foundational kind of solutions I think we can look at in our communities. Is housing affordable? Do we have a way for people to make it? creative solutions, are the little ways that people come together. I mean, libraries play a huge role in that. In a lot of communities, libraries are the one place that you can go where you can be warm and safe and get information. This is the last slide I have. This is a book that recently came out in case people are looking for things you can do. But I was going to touch really quick on those of you that may be interested in getting involved in these kind of issues. I personally don't believe that there's a hierarchy of activism. I think everything that we do matters. And when we're making change, it's not just the lawyers that are on the front line. Is the book coming through okay on the graphic? Okay. It's not just, the lawyers, but it's also the people that are answering the phone, that are volunteering, that are coming together in communities. Every little thing that we do. I have a friend right now that's running for school board, and that's a great way to make change. And I think particularly as voters on a local level, we can do a lot. It's possible to make a huge amount of change just on a local level by asking the people that we're voting for what they're doing on these issues, by being educated and aware of these issues so that we can vote accordingly. Yeah, I know there's a lot happening on the national political stage, and we can talk about that. But I think we really overlook sometimes what we can do on a local level, on a town-to-town, city-by-city, state level. And here in Oregon, we actually have a lot of the resources, and we have wonderfully caring communities where we actually could do a great deal to change the trajectory of the prison to homeless pipeline, to change the trajectory of mass incarceration by making a lot of little small changes, by looking at how we're funding things, by asking our representatives about these issues, by looking at reforming sentencing and sentencing guidelines, by asking how we're going to have interventions for young people or people that are in particularly high-risk populations. And all of that kind of stuff matters. And I think we can make such a difference just on a daily basis by the little things that we do. And all those little things, those little choices add up to just a great deal of change. So anyhow, I recommend this book if anybody's looking for a particular book about, she talks about just all the little ways that people are being part of a revolution to make change, from the little to the what seems like larger. But again, it's all, there's really no comparison between those. So anyhow, I would love to have a conversation because now is the time you can bring up, I can think of a bunch of things that I didn't cover and potentially missed. So is anybody? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, yeah, yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. So this is a highlight. OSP is right down outside of Salem. That's where we historically, I've been there a lot. Historically, that's where we had our death row. And then right near OSP, which is a maximum security prison, there's SCI, and which is, I think, a medium security now. So this cluster is right here. Yeah, so there's a little cluster of correctional institutions, kind of a trifecta down here. Yeah. So most of them are set out in these more remote areas, and I think people aren't just kind of. It's incarceration's one of those issues where people just can be blissfully unaware of it. And until you become familiar with it, it's really interesting. I want to make a point here too. I've been in a lot of prisons and jails, and just like I've worked with a lot of police officers, and a lot of these people are perfectly nice, often really good-hearted people. a lot of times people are working in corrections now because there's not a lot of job opportunities in their areas. Corrections is now kind of the blue collar job. People that used to work in timber and other blue collar industries that have died off now work in corrections. So there are a lot of areas in our country where there's basically two career paths. You can go to jail or prison as an inmate, or you can be the correctional staff who's watching over them, which is really depressing. And if you think about it, this is not a trajectory or a path to a healthy economy. It's not a trajectory or a path to a healthy nation or a healthy culture, because what are we doing? What's the final end stage of this illness going to look like? You know, when we have like 1 in every 2 people has a criminal record? I mean, I don't see any possible positive outcome to this. And it's also, I should add, there's a lot of people working in corrections. It is an incredibly hard, stressful job. The rates of suicide and addiction for people that work in prisons is astronomical. And the conditions that we allow in prisons affect them too. For instance, a lot of people don't want to pay for air conditioning in prisons. They think, well, we don't want to coddle the inmates, right? Well, guess who that also impacts? So the horrible working conditions, the violence, just the despair of it. You have thousands of mostly young people who are locked up during the most fruitful, energetic years of their lives. And it's something I often think and feel when I go into these prisons. You walk into a prison and it's like you're going into a town, or a city. And it's the city of people who've been exiled from our communities, and we've basically erased their existence to us. But they're in prison. We sent them there. We gave them a number. We kind of took away their identity. But that's where they are, and in that city and in that town, they've created their own kind of little culture, their own universe. A lot of times I think about all the stuff that those people could have been doing and have done. Like, what are we missing out on by sending all these people away? Yes, sir. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So how is it defined? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, and it's interesting because I haven't really seen any clear kind of definitions of just what mass incarceration means. I think mass incarceration is just kind of developed as a way of understanding what are, compared to other countries, astronomical incarceration rates. I mean, we have, I think, one of the highest, if not the highest, incarceration rates for a developed nation. And off the top of my head, I don't have the statistics for like the number in prison at any given point. And it's important to also think that it's a revolving door. It's not always the same people. They're going in, they're going out. So yeah, I'm actually curious about that, and I'll have to look up if there's actually like a particular thing. Just right here, then I'll get you and say, yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And just about the isolation. I mean, it's devastating for the people that are in the prison, and it's devastating for their families. I don't know if it still happens, but there used to be the prison van. And the prison van was like a bus, and it would actually go from around the state. So I think it's a 9-hour drive out through the deserts to Snake River. And so you'd see this, you'd be parking your car, and you see a bus pull up, unloading these exhausted moms and children who've been on this trying to visit all day. So yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly dislocating and so difficult for families to visit. And I also want to say it's tough to see kids in prison visiting their families too. the flip side of that is worrying about how this becomes then enculturated. I mean, the outcomes are much better if the parents can visit their kids for everybody. But I think there's also the concern, it's like, what's it like as a child to grow up thinking this is normal? So, yeah, very, very difficult. And people try, you really don't have any say over where you get placed in this whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, back there? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think that's something I think about a great deal, and I don't know if everybody caught that, but just there's prisons, and for instance, we've sent correctional management to prisons in Scandinavia, and actually just about a prison in any other country is nicer than the prisons, not El Salvador. But, there's this strain in our country of equating cruelty with virtue. And if you talk about being humane with humane inmates, you are somehow being soft on crime, or you're somehow endorsing them, or endorsing what they did, or somehow enabling that. And I do find it's just something that's really out there, where people feel like the crueler we are, the more virtuous we become. And so there is a great deal of resistance to the idea of treating any sort of incarceration as a rehabilitation. It's like we threw that baby out with the bathwater decades ago, and we're just on a punish, 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 punish. I want to add the caveat, though, that despite that, and often because of volunteers that go into the prison system, there's programs, for instance, wonderful programs where people teach reading and writing, and go into prisons. Friends of Bill, AA programs go into prisons and volunteer. So and that's one kind of volunteering, I think, that can make a huge difference. But as far as the physical conditions, and as far as what inmates are offered to actually better themselves, it's much more limited than in other countries. And I agree, there's just such a resistance. I'm not sure where all that comes from. There's almost sometimes a gleeful malice. Like, you hear people make jokes about prison rape. And, we had a civil lawsuit not that long ago with a lot of inmates who were filed a civil lawsuit here in Oregon because they were being systematically raped. So I just don't think it's funny. But people make jokes about this stuff as, what's going to happen to him when he goes to prison. And just real quick, I'll say that, the interesting thing in my experience, people say that the sex offenders are going to go to prison and people make jokes that the really bad people are going to go to prison, like a sex offender is going to go to prison and get raped. But that's not the reality. The sex offender goes to prison and is the one doing the raping. The people that are being raped are more like the people that are in, the 19-year-old that's in because he stole the car. So there was somebody up here real quick. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, on your statistics that you were mentioning, is that, I'm assuming 18 and older, is that where your numbers are?
These are wonderful questions. Yeah, the statistics of particularly how many people have criminal records. Yeah, this is all for adults. And that's a really good point because I work a fair number of juvenile cases. And juvenile cases there's some tricky parts here. But for the most part, juvenile cases are kind of off the record. They're not publicly, they don't follow you. The difference is when a juvenile commits a crime, which the state then has what they call waived into adult court. If a juvenile is being tried as an adult, then they will serve a sentence later as an adult, which is a whole nother issue.
On your 1.4 million,
Hmm?
what percentage is that of the, would you compare that to just the adult population?
That's of the adults. I think the math worked out between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6. So, yeah. The math doesn't work? Okay, you guys make sure to clarify that for me later. Okay, because I got this off of a advocacy org, so maybe the math is not right.
It's actually worse than that. It's more than 1 in 6 if it's 1.4 million. Because there's probably only 4.5 million adults in the state.
Okay.
So that'd be 1 in 4.
Oh, if you're just going with the adults. Oh, thank you for correcting that. Okay, that's a very good point because you're not including the children. Oh. You know what? Thank you for correcting that. Thank you. So nationally, the statistics are about 1 in 4 adults have a criminal record, which, yeah. There was somebody right back there. Yeah, sir.
One of the things that I have a client that got out of prison about 3 years ago, and George Floyd, before he was killed, was really kind of bitching about what kind of fees and income he has to pay to the state every month. So I asked this guy, because I know he taught in prison because he had an engineering degree. So anyway, he sent me a letter showing that every time he saw his parole officer, he had to pay $75. Every quarter, he had to pay $450 for a lie detector's test. But the whole monthly income that he spent, if he didn't have a job, he still had to come up with the money. So he had to spend about $800 a month for being a parolee in Oregon. Now, if he can't get a job, what kind of pressure does that put on them? So the recidivism for people that are on probation is extraordinarily high in Oregon.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is they end up violating their parole. Yeah, and you know what happens when somebody violates their parole? Where do they go? Prison Island. Yeah, exactly. And there's the gentleman in the purple shirt, and it's like, I'll get to you. Yeah, there's so many. When you're in prison too, the pennies you make go to your bills. So the system is just set up. I mean, I've had clients that were violated. I had one client who got a parole violation because he missed his meeting with his parole officer. This is a gentleman that was so low IQ, he could not read a bus schedule. He had intellectual disability to the point where he couldn't function, and yet he was getting parole. He was going to be violated and sent back to prison because he wasn't able to make a meeting to a place he couldn't find. Yeah, sir.
Well, we moved here from Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And the county that we came from, the Walnut Valley Correctional Institute was the facility, WVCF was the major employer of the entire county. I mean, if it wasn't for those raising corn and soybeans and working for the prison, there wouldn't be any work. We as non-criminals got to visit the facility.
Mm-hmm.
You do it as part of your career. I mean, part of your job. But folks, if you've never visited
Mm-hmm.
take that as a job. And we had a brother that worked there, but it's frightening. And I think really, younger people were to go and see what it's like to be in a prison. It would scare them straight. I really do. I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, and also, yeah, and just there's a lot of what happens in a lot of these kind of places is a town is created. We think of them as prison towns. So the economy becomes enculturated to the prison. And in fact, I remember going up to see in a prison in Orfinio, Idaho. It's a long drive. And I had to go do a DNA swab of an inmate way out in Orfinio. And I'm pretty sure that what's that? Orfino, thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. By the Clearwater River? Ah, gorgeous. But I'm pretty sure that the town sports team was, Orfino, was the Maniacs. Yeah. Yeah, so you have this whole town kind of grows up around these prisons, and the people that work at the prisons then have, send their kids to the school. It's just a whole little culture. I'm sorry, the gentleman in the, yeah, go ahead.
There's a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
There's many, many problems.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to fix them all right away.
No.
So if you were thinking back, where would you start? Because you have to start someplace.
Oh, that is such a good question. Where to start? I think we need to start locally, like here in the state. I mean, there's, obviously where people are working federally, but I think if we start locally in terms of addressing this with our representatives and when we're voting and asking people, where they stand on these issues, I think that there needs to be also a reexamination of our sentencing guidelines. Just to touch upon it briefly, we have a lot of mandatory sentencing. So a mandatory sentence means that the judge and the people that are experts there have no leeway. And that's something we can really look at because every case is different. And I think we need to entrust professionals to step in and say, okay, this is somebody who got into a bar fight, right? He's 23. He knows he has an alcohol problem now. He's going to treatment. That situation is a lot different than another situation. And to have this cookie cutter mold where we're just like everybody has to go to prison for this number of years is part of the problem. So I'm not sure if that's quite answering it, but I think in our communities being aware of the issues and when we're looking at things like the homeless issue, not jumping right away to let's incarcerate more people, but looking at solutions where we're actually trying to better their lives. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and thank you, because I think, the big part is just awareness, so that when we're with our families and friends, or when there's a new ballot measure that's on the thing, or we're going to talk about voting for somebody, or we're all having like a discussion around like, are we going to criminalize tent camping, for instance? These are big discussions in Portland. Should we criminalize camping on the street? You probably guess what my answer would be. I think it's way better to get services and housing for people. Putting them in jail for a week is not going to help, because then they don't have a tent anymore. And things get even worse at that point. So, yeah, a lot of it's just awareness and hitting that pause on that like, let's send them to prison thing. I absolutely agree. And let me check the time. Oh, okay, we have time for one quick question, and then I should let you guys go. Yes? Oh, so the El Salvador thing, yeah, this is, I think we're paying them $6 a year. And guess where that, yeah, so the El Salvadoran thing is, I don't want to say interesting. We're paying them $6 million. Guess where the $6 million comes from? Our tax dollars are paying them to export people. I'm not going to say deport. Deport is when you send somebody back to their country and let them go. But we're exiling people to this prison where supposedly nobody ever gets out, and they haven't been convicted of an offense. There's no due process, and our tax dollars are now paying. And I guess what I would say to this is we have horrible conditions in our prisons here, but we do have due process. It's an incredibly flawed system, but there are strengths to our system here. There are people like me that can work cases. There are attorneys that can represent inmates in lawsuits. There are appeals. There are ways that people might find justice here. That's not going to happen in El Salvador. So to me, that's absolutely horrifying. And I know that there's talk that they want to send people that are citizens here. Yeah, they call them the homegrowns. I don't know how that's supposed to work because as citizens, you are entitled to an attorney. You are entitled to legal representation. So I don't think it's more cheaper. I think it goes to the cruelty issue. Yeah, I think that it's just a point of it's the ultimate way to exile somebody. The ultimate exile is to take somebody, whether they've been convicted of an offense or not, and disappear them into a torture prison where they're never going to get out. I think the cruelty is kind of the point there. I don't think it's because it's cheaper. If it was just a matter of money, we would just deport somebody back to their home country or give them services here. So I don't think it's an economic equation. That's my opinion. And I should let you guys go. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you. Oh, and if you want, there's my website. Thank you, everyone. And a big thank you, too, to the Lake Oswego Library for doing this. This is not your conventional reading, and I want to say I really appreciate their willingness to tackle these topics. So thank you to the library. The book? It's How to Write... No, I haven't yet. Is it... I should, right? Yeah. Okay.